I never planned to walk into that gallery. It wasn't on my route, and honestly, I didn't care much for modern art. But the rain had started without warning, and my last delivery had left me soaked to the skin. My phone battery was dying, and I just needed somewhere warm to stand for 10 minutes. That's all I was looking for. 10 minutes and a dry floor. The building was quiet. No music, no murmured conversations like you'd expect in a museum. Just the sound of water dripping from my jacket, and the slow hum of heat blowing through vents overhead. It felt like I'd stepped into someone else's dream one, where everything was white, still, and waiting. I didn't notice the man at first. My eyes were drawn to the only splash of color in the room, a painting on the far wall. It was just a smear of reds and deep browns, like someone had tried to set fire to the canvas and then changed their mind halfway through. I couldn't decide if I liked it or not. That's when I saw him. He was sitting alone near the window, back slightly hunched, hands resting on the arms of his chair like he'd been there a while. There was something deliberate about the way he didn't move, like he was choosing not to engage with the world. In front of him sat a paper bag, opened halfway, with the top of a sandwich peeking out. The kind you buy because it's easy, not because you're hungry. I should have looked away. Should have kept moving toward the back of the room, or maybe pretended to be interested in another piece. But I didn't. I stood there, dripping, half frozen, watching this stranger and thinking about the knot in my stomach that hadn't gone away in 3 days. Maybe it was the smell of bread. Maybe it was the way he stared at nothing with the kind of silence only grief can teach you. Or maybe I was just tired. Bone-deep, soul-level tired. Whatever it was, I heard my voice before I had time to stop it. "Excuse me," I said, my own voice startling in the stillness. "Are you going to finish that?" He turned slowly, eyes meeting mine with a kind of surprise that wasn't offended, just curious. I felt my face burn. What kind of person asks a stranger for their leftover lunch in an art gallery? But instead of answering, he did something strange. He smiled, and just like that, I stopped feeling like I'd interrupted something. He didn't answer right away, just tilted his head a little, like he wanted to make sure he heard me correctly. Then he looked down at the sandwich like it had suddenly appeared there without his permission. I was ready to apologize, maybe back away. God knows I've had enough people look at me like I was invisible or worse, like I was something they'd stepped over. But that wasn't the look I got from him. It wasn't pity. That's the part that caught me off guard. People think pity is kindness in disguise, but they don't understand how heavy it feels, how it presses on your shoulders like wet clothes. This man didn't have that in his eyes. He wasn't judging me either. That would have been easier, honestly. Familiar? But no, his expression held something I didn't recognize right away. Recognition. Like maybe, just maybe, he'd been hungry once too. In some way. He reached into the paper bag, pulled the sandwich out slowly, and placed it on a napkin. Then he pushed the napkin across the small side table toward me. "I wasn't planning on it," he said. His voice was low, warm. Southern, maybe, or just tired. "You're welcome to it." I hesitated. "Are you sure? I didn't mean—" "You meant you were hungry," he said. "That's enough." I didn't sit down right away. I was still standing there, backpack dripping onto the clean floor, looking at a stranger who'd just handed me half a sandwich like it was the most normal thing in the world. And maybe it should have been. Maybe it should be normal. But it wasn't. Not for me. I took it gently, like it might disappear if I held it wrong. "It's turkey," he added, with a small shrug. "Plain. Not a fan of condiments." A laugh escaped me, the first real one in weeks. Not loud, just enough to remind me I still could. "I like plain," I said. I figured. I finally sat down, not across from him exactly, but to the side angled, like neither of us was sure we wanted this to be a conversation. For a few minutes, we just sat there in silence while I ate. The sandwich was a little dry, but it tasted better than anything I'd had in days. Not because of the meat or the bread or the temperature, but because it was given without agenda, without strings. He didn't ask what brought me here, didn't try to fix anything. He just let me be a person, in a room full of stillness, holding half a sandwich like it was enough. And somehow, for that moment, it was. When I finished eating, I folded the napkin slowly, not sure what to do with my hands. The room was still quiet. No one had come in. The lights overhead buzzed faintly, like a whisper no one wanted to hear. He hadn't moved much since offering the sandwich. Just sat there, hands relaxed in his lap, eyes drifting occasionally to the same painting I noticed when I first walked in. The one with the reds and browns clashing like a memory someone was trying to forget. "Thanks," I said, clearing my throat. "That was more than I expected today." He gave a slight nod, like he didn't want to make it a big deal. I liked that. There was a pause, a kind of soft space between us, not awkward exactly, just unfilled, like a bench left open on purpose in case someone else needed to sit. "You want to stay a while?" he asked, still not looking directly at me. I blinked. "Here?" He motioned to the empty chair beside him. "Not many people come in on rainy afternoons. You're not bothering me." It was the way he said it. No insistence, no obligation, just an open door that I could walk through or ignore. I thought about declining, about grabbing my bag, muttering another thanks, and disappearing into the drizzle outside. But the truth was, I didn't want to go back to the car just yet. Didn't want to see my brother staring at the fogged-up window, asking if dinner was coming. I didn't want to be back in the world where I was always on the edge of almost. So I sat down. We didn't talk for a few minutes. Just stared at the painting together, both pretending to study it like we were qualified to say what it meant. He finally broke the silence. "I've been coming here for years. That one's always in the same spot. They say it's about conflict, but I don't buy it." "What do you think it's about?" He hesitated. "I think it's about endurance, about staying upright even when everything inside is breaking apart." I didn't say anything. Didn't need to. Because suddenly I realized I wasn't sitting next to a man who had everything figured out. I was sitting next to someone who knew what it felt like to fall apart and still show up the next day. And somehow, that made me feel less alone than I'd felt in a long, long time. I wasn't always this version of myself, the girl sitting in a gallery with wet socks, eating a stranger's sandwich like it was sacred. 2 years ago, I had a job, a routine, a front porch with a potted fern I remembered to water. I was a second-grade teacher at a public school in Bakersfield. Nothing fancy, just the kind of school where you buy your own supplies and memorize the names of every sibling in the family, because you'll teach them all eventually. I loved it. I really did. I wasn't one of those teachers counting down to retirement. Every morning, I looked forward to the noise, the chaos, the one kid who always drew dinosaurs instead of doing math, the girl who whispered thank you every time I tied her shoe. They were mine for 7 hours a day, and I showed up for them like they were the only thing that mattered. Then the pandemic hit. At first, we thought it would just be a few weeks. Remote learning, they said. Just temporary. But my mom got sick early. She was healthy, strong, ran 3 miles every morning and still beat me at Scrabble. But the virus didn't care. Within days, she couldn't breathe. By the time we got a hospital bed, it was too late. I wasn't even allowed to sit with her. I said goodbye through a screen. After that, I couldn't go back to the classroom. Not really. I tried, but everything felt hollow. The kids looked at me like I'd gone somewhere they couldn't follow. I was still grading papers, still showing up to Zoom calls, but I wasn't there. Not all the way. Then my brother started spiraling. Tyler's on the spectrum high functioning, they call it, but he doesn't do well with disruption. Our mom had always been the one to keep him grounded. Her routines kept his world from slipping sideways. When she died, his world broke, and I became the only person left to hold it together. I quit teaching 6 months later. Not because I didn't care, but because I couldn't do both. Couldn't be a full-time teacher to 30 kids and a full-time caretaker to 1. I sold the apartment. We moved into the RV our uncle had parked in his driveway for years. I told myself it was temporary, that I'd figure things out. But figuring things out takes time. And time doesn't wait for you to grieve, or panic, or get your balance back. It just keeps moving. Now most days I deliver food, drive strangers' orders to addresses I'll never see twice. And most nights I park near the beach because Tyler sleeps better when he hears the ocean. People think losing everything happens in a flash. Sometimes it's just a slow unraveling thread by thread until one day you realize the person you used to be is gone. And all that's left is someone who asks for a stranger's leftovers because they don't want to go home empty-handed. I used to think the lowest point in life would come with some kind of alarm bell. A crash, a scream, something loud that marked the moment you officially hit bottom. But sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it sounds like your own voice asking, "Are you going to finish that?" I replayed that sentence in my head for hours afterward. The way it came out of my mouth too fast, like my stomach hijacked my pride before I could stop it. I hated saying it. Hated how small it made me feel. Hated that it wasn't the first time. This wasn't some act of desperation born in a single moment. I've hovered around the edge of that kind of hunger for months. Not starvation, not collapse, but a slow erosion of dignity. Skipping meals because Tyler needed dinner, drinking water when I should have had something solid, telling myself I wasn't really hungry, just tired, always tired. There's a kind of shame that comes with that. Not because I think food is something I need to earn, but because I used to give it. I used to hand out granola bars to kids who forgot lunch. Used to buy snacks with my own paycheck so no one in my classroom had to pretend they weren't hungry. Now I was the one pretending. So, yes, I asked a stranger if I could have his sandwich. And even though he gave it to me without hesitation, even though he didn't look at me like I was less than, I still felt the weight of what I'd done long after I left that gallery. I don't think people realize how much it costs to ask for help. Not money, not time, but identity. Every time you admit you need something, you trade a little piece of how you saw yourself for how you hope someone else will see you. That day, I traded the version of me who could handle everything for the version who couldn't even afford lunch. I told myself it was just food. Just one question. Just one moment. But it wasn't. It was me, standing in the middle of a quiet gallery, soaking wet, exhausted, and offering up my vulnerability like a bargain I didn't want to make. Because there was no pride left. Just the hope that maybe, for once, someone wouldn't see my need as weakness. And in that small, silent exchange with a man I didn't know, who said nothing more than, "You're welcome to it," I felt something shift, not just in how I saw him, but in how I might start seeing myself again. After a while, I stood up, brushing crumbs from my jeans, like that somehow made me more presentable. He didn't move, just kept looking at the painting like it held a question he hadn't figured out how to answer yet. "I should get going," I said, reaching for my bag. "Thanks again, for the sandwich." "And the seat." He looked over, expression unreadable, like he was still deciding if he should speak or let me go. Then, without a word, he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a small, silver USB drive. He held it in his open palm, not offering it, just letting it sit there like a coin on a table. "This belonged to my wife," he said quietly. "Well, not really. She never used it. But I wrote something for her, years ago, before she passed." I didn't know what to say. I wasn't sure why he was telling me. I wasn't even sure if he was telling me or just speaking into the stillness. He looked down at the drive, then up at me. "I was going to throw it away last month. I came close, but for some reason I couldn't. I figured maybe it still had a place in the world. Just maybe not the place I first imagined." He paused, then added, "You seem like someone who understands what it means to carry more than you say out loud." That sentence hit me in a way I wasn't ready for. I didn't ask what was on the USB. I didn't ask why he thought I should have it. I didn't even ask his name. He just extended his hand. "If you want it," he said, "take it. If not, leave it here. No hard feelings either way." I took it. Not because I needed a file, not because I thought it would change anything, but because for the first time in months, someone offered me something that wasn't pity. It wasn't charity. It wasn't a handout. It was a handoff. Like he was saying, "I'm not done, but I don't know what to do next." Maybe you do? I slipped the drive into my pocket. It felt heavier than it should have. We didn't say goodbye. We didn't exchange names. I just nodded and stepped back into the cold, damp evening. The rain had stopped, but the sky still hung low, heavy with things unsaid. Back in the car, Tyler was asleep, his hoodie pulled over his eyes, mouth slightly open. I pulled a blanket up to his chin and sat there for a long time with the engine off and the USB pressed into my palm. I hadn't planned on ending my day with half a sandwich and a stranger's unfinished goodbye. But maybe that's exactly what I needed. I've met wealthy people before. Not often, but enough to form an opinion. They usually walk like the floor belongs to them. Talk like silence is just another room they haven't bought yet. They say I understand when they don't. They offer help that feels more like being managed than supported. So when I looked at that man quiet, slow-spoken, sitting in a dusty chair in a nearly empty gallery, I didn't think wealthy. I thought worn out. I thought lonely. But later that night, lying in the back of the RV with the USB still in my coat pocket, I couldn't stop replaying the way he looked at me. Not curious, not surprised, just present, like someone who wasn't waiting to talk. He didn't ask what happened to me, didn't ask where I lived or what I did for work or why I looked like I hadn't slept in a while. He didn't ask anything, really. He just gave. And not in the way people usually give, wrapped in small talk or guilt or some transactional need to feel better about themselves. No. His giving was quiet, like breathing, like it was more for him than for me, or maybe for someone else entirely. I don't know why that stuck with me. Maybe because it had been so long since anyone let me just be. No performance, no explanation, no checklist of proof that I deserved help. I didn't even know his name, but I started thinking of him as Marcus in my head. I don't know why. The name just seemed to fit. It had weight. History. He didn't look like a man who had given up. He looked like someone who'd paused, like he was waiting for the world to make a move he could finally respond to. And I wondered, what kind of grief does that to a person? What kind of loss makes you sit in front of the same painting every week, looking for an answer in the same tired brushstrokes? I didn't know. But I knew this. He wasn't rich in the way people usually mean it. He didn't flash it, didn't wear it, didn't hide behind it. He wore it like a faded jacket, something he'd had for so long it stopped being noticeable, something that kept him warm, but never protected him from the cold inside. It took me 2 days to open the USB drive. Not because I forgot, not because I was busy, but because I wasn't sure I was ready to know what was on it. Some things feel more sacred when they're sealed. You don't want to ruin the mystery by looking too closely. But curiosity's funny like that. It creeps in slowly, until suddenly it feels like not knowing is worse than anything you might discover. So one night, after Tyler finally fell asleep, I plugged the drive into my old laptop, the one with the cracked hinge and 3 missing keys. The screen flickered to life with a faint hum, and a single folder appeared on the desktop. Elise. That was it. One name, one word, one person. I clicked it open. Inside were a few documents, mostly Word files, 1 PDF, and a folder of scanned images. I opened the first document. It was titled, Community Art Program, Working Draft. It read like the beginning of a proposal. Maybe for a grant or a pilot project. The tone was thoughtful, clear. It wasn't corporate speak. It was personal, full of phrases like accessible spaces for kids who don't fit the mold and creativity as stability, not escape. Each section referenced someone named Elise. Elise thought music helped concentration. Elise believed in giving students real brushes, not cheap foam ones. Elise used to say art was a way back when language broke down. Page after page, I felt like I was getting to know her through his voice, through memories dressed up as bullet points. There was no romantic language, no mourning, just facts wrapped in quiet affection. I opened the image folder next. Photos of murals, art classes in church basements, kids painting with both hands. One picture showed a woman in jeans and a paint-streaked sweatshirt laughing in front of a massive canvas. She wasn't model beautiful. She was real beautiful. Messy, radiant, alive. Even though the photo was low quality, even though I'd never met her, I could see the gravity she must have carried in a room. Elise. She was the kind of woman people followed. The kind of woman who had ideas and didn't wait for permission to make them real. And suddenly, the man in the gallery wasn't just a quiet stranger anymore. He was someone who had stood beside that kind of energy. Loved it. Lost it. And for some reason, handed a piece of it to me. I closed the laptop, leaned back, and stared at the ceiling of the RV. Rain started to tap gently against the roof, soft and steady, like fingers on skin. Elise. Now I had a name to match the silence he carried, and I wasn't sure yet if that made things clearer or harder. I don't know what made me do it. Maybe it was the rain. Maybe it was the fact that Tyler had gone to bed early for once, leaving the RV unusually quiet. Or maybe it was Elise. Her name still hanging in the back of my mind like the echo of a song I didn't know I'd memorized. Whatever the reason, I opened my laptop again, found the file marked Contact, and saw his email. Just his first initial and last name, nothing fancy. No company, no LinkedIn signature, just him. I stared at the screen for a long time before typing anything. I wasn't even sure why I was writing. It wasn't like I had a proposal or a question. I didn't need anything from him. At least, that's what I told myself. The email wasn't long, just a few lines. I read what you wrote, about Elise. I didn't know her, but I wish I had. My little brother. He doesn't talk much, and he's never been good with people. But when he draws, it's like he's finally allowed to exist out loud. Thank you for not throwing this away. I hit send before I could second-guess it. Then I closed the laptop and tried not to think about it again. I didn't expect a reply. Not that night. Not ever. But the next morning, while Tyler was brushing his teeth in a gas station bathroom and I was waiting in the car, my phone buzzed. New message. Elise. I'm glad you opened it. If you and your brother ever want a place to land for a while, not permanent, just quieter. I have a house. It's mostly empty these days. I promise I'm not a creep. The kitchen still works. The water's hot. Think about it. No pressure. I read it 3 times, not sure if it was real. The punctuation, the tone. It was him. I could hear it in the pauses. I didn't answer right away. I needed time to think. But the truth? I'd already decided. Not because I trusted him fully, not because I thought it would fix anything, but because the idea of being in a place with walls that didn't shake every time a car passed by, that was enough. That night, after dinner, 2 peanut butter sandwiches and a shared banana, I told Tyler we'd be taking a short trip the next day. He didn't ask questions. He never does. But when I buckled him into his seat the next morning, he looked at me and said, "Where are we going?" And I said the first honest answer I'd given in months. I don't know yet, but maybe somewhere we can stay still for a little while. The house sat at the end of a quiet street lined with eucalyptus trees, their leaves whispering in the morning wind like they were telling secrets no one ever wrote down. It wasn't a mansion, wasn't cold or grand, just a simple 2-story place with faded shutters and ivy curling around the porch railings, the kind of house that used to hold laughter. I knocked, even though he said I didn't need to. No one answered. The front door was already unlocked. I hesitated. Hand on the knob, heart beating in that slow, uncertain way it does when you're walking into something someone else once loved. Tyler waited in the car, his headphones on, staring at nothing. He didn't like new spaces. I needed to go in first, make sure the light switches worked, make sure the shadows stayed put. The living room smelled faintly of books and dust. There were no family photos, no clutter. Just a worn couch, a wooden coffee table, and a single canvas leaning against the far wall half-finished. Earth tones. Abstract. a swirl that looked almost like a figure turning away. I walked slowly, like the floor might shift beneath me. The silence wasn't heavy, just respectful, like the house was holding its breath, waiting to see who I'd be. In the kitchen, I found a note. "The fridge works. Feel free to use anything. Studio's in the back. She always wanted it open. I didn't go to the studio right away. I made Tyler a snack, helped him find the room with the softest light. He curled up on the bed without saying a word. Safe. That's all he ever needed. Later that afternoon, once the sun had settled into a quiet glow across the floorboards, I opened the studio door. It was warm in there. South-facing windows, dust floating like glitter in the air. Shelves lined with brushes, neatly arranged by size. Jars of pigment. Canvases stacked in a corner. And taped to the wall was a large piece of butcher paper, faded at the edges. If they can't speak, let them paint. If they can't sit still, let them move with color. If they feel too much, give them space to feel it with their hands. There was no name under the quote, but I knew it belonged to Elise. I read it twice, then again. I felt something behind my ribs shift, like an old bruise remembering why it hurt. She didn't know me, had probably never heard my name, but somehow this woman had spoken to every part of me I thought I'd buried. She had dreamed what I dreamed, a place for kids who didn't fit in neat lines, a space where expression came first and comprehension came later. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a failed teacher or a burned-out caretaker. I felt like maybe, just maybe, I was exactly where someone like me was supposed to land. We didn't bring much with us. Just a few changes of clothes, Tyler's sketchbooks, my laptop, and a shoebox full of receipts and expired IDs I couldn't throw away for reasons I still don't understand. It felt strange carrying so little into a house that carried so much. Marcus wasn't there when we arrived, just the note in the kitchen and a basket by the door filled with towels, fresh sheets, and, of all things, a flashlight. There was something deeply human about that flashlight, like he knew we might not trust the switches yet. The room he left for Tyler had wide windows and soft yellow curtains. No posters, no furniture except a bed and a beanbag in the corner. I helped Tyler set up his books by the window. He ran his fingers across the wall once, then sat down without a sound and started to draw. That was his way of saying it felt okay. My room was across the hall. It smelled like cedar and linen. The closet was empty, and the bed was neatly made with a navy blue quilt that looked handmade. The kind of stitching that takes time, not money. I didn't unpack right away. I walked barefoot down the hallway, brushing my fingers along the frames that lined the wall. No photos, just sketches, mostly landscapes. All signed with a looping E. The light in the house was soft. Not dim, not harsh. It felt like the kind of light that had been loved into place over time. That night, Marcus stopped by. Didn't knock, just opened the door and called out, "It's just me." I met him in the kitchen. He held 2 grocery bags and a 6-pack of ginger ale. "Didn't know what Tyler likes," he said, placing things on the counter. "So I got 3 types of crackers and 4 kinds of cheese. Hopefully one lands." "He doesn't like cheese," I said, smiling for the first time that day. "But he'll eat the crackers if they're plain." "Got lucky then," he said, holding up the box like a minor victory. We didn't talk about the past, or why he was letting strangers stay in a house that clearly held the shape of someone else's life. He didn't explain, and I didn't ask. Instead, he poured ginger ale into 2 mismatched glasses and raised his, like we were toasting to something unspoken. "To the ones we carry," he said. I didn't understand what he meant then, but I lifted my glass anyway. And in that quiet kitchen, under warm lights and next to grocery bags full of small guesses, I started to feel something unfamiliar blooming behind my ribs. Not gratitude, not hope, just the beginning of feeling safe. It was the only door in the house that didn't open. At first, I thought maybe it was a utility closet or a storage room somewhere forgotten, filled with boxes and broken lamps. But the way it was positioned at the end of the upstairs hallway, directly across from the light-filled studio, told me otherwise. It was intentional, centered, like a period at the end of a sentence that had never been finished. I didn't try the handle, didn't knock, didn't even pause long enough to be obvious, but I noticed it. Every day. In the way the floorboards didn't creak there, in the way the air seemed just a little heavier near that frame. Tyler never asked about it. He never asked about anything, really, but even he gave it a wide berth, like kids sometimes do when they sense a boundary without needing it explained. Marcus never mentioned it. Not once. He came by every few days, brought more groceries, dropped off clean towels, sometimes left fresh flowers from the yard in a mug on the table. He never stayed long, never overstepped, but I could feel him watching from a distance, making sure we were okay. Not in a controlling way, more like a lighthouse, steady, present, but never intrusive. One morning, I was sitting on the floor of the studio, sorting through brushes with bristles as soft as whispers, when I heard his footsteps in the hallway. Slow, familiar. He didn't come in. He stopped outside that closed door. There was no sound for a long while. I stayed still, not wanting to break whatever invisible moment was happening on the other side of the wall. Then I heard the softest knock him tapping the wood once with his knuckle. Just once. And then he walked away. Later that evening, as we sat on the porch watching Tyler sketch the neighbor's dog from memory, I almost asked. Almost. But something in me knew the question wasn't mine to ask. That door wasn't just closed. It was guarded. Not out of secrecy, but grief. The kind that doesn't need an audience. The kind that takes up space long after the person is gone. So instead, I said, "The studio's beautiful. Thank you." And Marcus, without looking at me, simply replied, "It was hers." That was all. That was enough. It started on a Tuesday evening, just after sunset. Tyler was asleep early. He'd spent the afternoon sketching waves, tracing the lines again and again like he was trying to memorize their rhythm. I was sitting in the hallway, legs curled under me, sorting through a small stack of unpaid bills I still carried out of habit. Some debts are emotional, not financial. The house was quiet. Then I heard it. Soft, low, deliberate. Piano. At first I thought it was in my head, some phantom melody stirred by memory or exhaustion. But then it happened again. A few clear notes, played with purpose. Hesitant, but not unsure. I stood, slowly. The music was coming from behind the closed door. It wasn't loud. If anything, it sounded like someone was trying not to be heard. Like the house itself was playing gently, afraid of waking ghosts. I stepped closer. Not too close, just enough to lean against the wall and let the music wrap around me. I didn't recognize the piece, but it felt old. Not dusty, old, timeless old. The kind of music that's been passed down from hands that felt too much. It was full of space. notes that lingered, pauses that said more than sound could. It wasn't perfect. The tempo shifted. One note missed. Another held too long. But it was human, and that made it beautiful. I closed my eyes, pressing my shoulder to the cool plaster wall, and breathed it in. I didn't cry. Not yet. But I wanted to, because that music told me things Marcus hadn't. It told me someone used to play in that room, not for others, but for themselves. It told me they weren't trying to impress, or perform, or prove anything. They were just speaking the only way they knew how. And now, someone, Marcus, I guessed, was speaking to her again. One key at a time. I stayed there until it stopped. And when the last note faded, I didn't move for a long while. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full, like the echo of something sacred being gently folded back into the dark. The next morning I didn't mention it. Neither did he. But when he dropped by that afternoon with oranges from the backyard tree, I noticed something different in his face. Not softer, not lighter, but less locked. He didn't say much, just handed me the fruit, nodded toward Tyler's sketch on the fridge, and said, "He's got good instincts." And as he turned to go, I wanted to say, "I heard you," not to break the quiet, but to honor it. Instead, I said nothing. Some things deserve to stay between the music and the one who remembers. I hadn't been back to the gallery since that first day. The day with the sandwich, the cold air, the beginning I didn't know was beginning anything. But one rainy afternoon, same kind of gray as before, I found myself parked outside, hands wrapped around a lukewarm cup of gas station coffee, staring at the door. It didn't look different. Still quiet, still unassuming, still tucked between a bookstore no one went to and a juice bar trying too hard. I went in. The air was still too cool, the silence still too complete, like time hadn't bothered to move forward in here. I walked slowly, letting my footsteps echo. There was a faint buzz in the overhead lights, and a janitor somewhere down the hall was whistling off-key. And then I saw it, or rather, I didn't. The painting, the one Marcus used to sit in front of, the one with the reds and browns tangled like tension, the one I'd stared at through half a sandwich and a flood of shame. It was gone. The wall was still there, still bare. But instead of brush strokes, there was only a faint shadow of where the frame used to hang. Like it had been there so long the wall had memorized it. I asked the front desk. The young man looked up from his crossword. "Which one?" I described it. "Oh yeah," he said. "Sold last week. Guy came in, didn't even haggle, paid cash. First time I've ever seen that piece leave the wall. Thought it was glued there." He laughed at his own joke. I didn't. Sold, just like that. I left the gallery in a fog, the coffee still clutched in my hand like a forgotten errand. Back at the house, Marcus was sitting on the porch. Same place he always sat. A book closed in his lap, not reading, just existing. I sat next to him. "You bought it," I said, not asking. He didn't answer right away. Just looked out at the trees swaying in the wind like they were nodding to some truth between us. "I got tired of looking at it in public," he finally said. "It felt exposed." "And now?" "It's still hard to look at," he admitted. "But it's mine now. Mine to face, or not." I didn't ask where he hung it. I didn't need to. Some things, when removed from where they've always been, don't disappear. They just finally come home. He didn't invite me in. He just left the door open. I noticed it the next morning. The hallway that always ended in silence now ended in something else possibility. The door was ajar, just enough to catch the morning light spilling through. No creak, no drama, just open. Like it had always been that way, and I was the one who hadn't been ready to look. I didn't go in at first. I passed it twice, once with a laundry basket, once with Tyler's sketchbook in hand. But by late afternoon, I found myself standing at the threshold, fingers resting on the frame, holding my breath like the room might exhale if I did. It smelled like wood and paint, and something softer faded lavender maybe, the kind of scent that lives in blankets long after someone's gone. The curtains were drawn halfway. Light filtered in through sheer fabric, gentle and golden. And on the far wall, directly opposite the door, hung the painting. Weight of waiting. Same reds, same browns, same fractured stillness. But it felt different here. In the gallery, it had always felt like a wall you ran into. Here, it felt like a mirror you weren't afraid to look at. There was a chair in the corner, slightly turned toward the painting, and on a low table beside it, a small stack of Elise's sketchbooks, her initials curled in the corner like a whisper. Marcus came up behind me, quiet as always. "I didn't think I'd ever bring it here," he said. I turned to look at him. He wasn't guarded, just open, like the room. "I used to stare at it every week, hoping it would stop hurting," he continued. "Then one day, I realized it wasn't supposed to stop. It was supposed to sit with me, to say, 'I see you. I know.'" I nodded, because there was nothing else to say. "You bought it," I said again, not as an accusation, just truth. "I didn't want anyone else deciding where it belonged," he said. "It was never just a painting. Not for me. She used to call it ours. Even though she didn't paint it, she just understood it. Like she understood you." He looked at me then, really looked. Like she might have understood you, too. I looked back at the painting. The reds didn't shout anymore. They pulsed. The browns didn't clash, they carried. "You ever going to close this room again?" I asked quietly. He shook his head once. "No. I think it's time it stayed open." I stepped inside, fully now, and the floor didn't creak beneath me. We stood together, not speaking, just letting the room breathe. Sometimes healing doesn't come in grand gestures. Sometimes it's just leaving the door open. I stepped fully into the room, letting the light hit my shoulders like a quiet blessing. The air was different in here. Still, but not stale. Like someone had exhaled and left it behind years ago, maybe, but it hadn't gone cold yet. Everything was untouched, yet not abandoned. A long table ran along the far wall, covered in large sketch pads, torn paper, and coffee mugs filled with stiffened brushes. Pencil stubs rolled gently in the breeze from the cracked window. A radio sat in the corner, unplugged, next to a pile of CDs labeled in neat handwriting, practice sets, messy drafts, strings only. There was no dust on the brushes. That's what stopped me. Everything else bore time's fingerprints, curled edges, faded ink, but not the brushes. Someone had cleaned them recently. Someone had cared. I reached for one sketch pad and opened to the first page. It wasn't a finished drawing, just outlines, rough forms, children's hands, a swing set, a wheelchair next to a paint-splattered easel. The second page, a girl laughing, half-rendered, the teeth unshaded, the eyes blurred, like she hadn't decided who the child was yet. Maybe she didn't need to. Maybe it was about all of them. Page after page, I saw children, imperfect, alive, moving even though they were only pencil lines. There were notes in the margins. Let them make noise. Don't force quiet. Quiet isn't always peace. Every mess tells a story. Each page felt like a conversation I'd been missing for years. I sat on the edge of the wooden stool by the window. The cushion was worn, flattened in the middle. A shadow of a body that had once returned here again and again. From where I sat, I could see the entire room. The brushes, the sketches, the closed sketchbooks with Elise's initials, EH, in the bottom corners. There was no shrine here, no sanctified silence. Just the kind of sacred you feel when someone believed so fully in something, it refused to die with them. Marcus stood at the door. He didn't come in. "She worked in here every morning," he said. "Didn't matter if the world was on fire. She'd open the window, pour cheap coffee into that chipped mug," he pointed, "and lose herself in the possible." "The possible," I repeated. He nodded. "She always said kids weren't broken, just misfiled by a system too impatient to listen." I closed the sketchbook gently, like setting down something still warm. "She didn't finish any of these," I said. "She didn't need to," Marcus replied. "She just needed someone else to pick them up." That's when I realized. This room wasn't her legacy. It was an invitation. It started with a question so quiet I almost didn't catch it. We were sitting on the back porch, the evening light softening everything it touched. Tyler was in the grass, barefoot, arranging twigs and leaves into some kind of pattern only he understood. Marcus handed me a folder. I looked at it, then at him. "Elise's drafts," he said. "Outlines for the community art program. She never got to submit them." I opened the folder. The pages inside were hand-annotated, not polished. Real. Full of half-formed ideas and tiny bursts of clarity. One section was labeled Sensory-Based Art for Non-Verbal Children. Another, Partnerships with Local Schools if they'll listen. "You want me to read these?" I asked slowly. "I want you to tell me what you see in them," he said, "and if any of it still makes sense." I flipped through the first few pages, heart thudding harder than it should have. It felt like being handed something sacred fragile, but meant to be held. "She didn't leave instructions," I said. "I wouldn't know where to start." Marcus shook his head. "She didn't believe in instructions. She believed in instincts." He looked out toward the yard, where Tyler was now drawing shapes in the dirt with a stick. "She would have wanted this to keep going," he said, "but I couldn't do it alone. And I couldn't bring myself to ask anyone until now." I sat with that for a moment. He wasn't offering me a job. He wasn't giving me a project. He was inviting me in, not just to Elise's space, but to her purpose. "You really think I'm the right person?" I asked. "I think you're the person who walked in here and didn't flinch," he said. "And maybe that's enough." He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small USB stick newer than the one he gave me weeks ago. "This has all her grant notes, partner emails, early budgets. Most of it's outdated, but the heart is still there." I took it carefully, as if it might break under pressure. "Start wherever you want," he said. "Trash it all if it doesn't work, but if even one part of it still feels alive, maybe we build something from that." I didn't answer right away, but I held on to that folder like it meant something. Because it did. Because maybe all my years of scrambling to survive had been leading to this quiet offering, a second chance to not just exist, but matter. Okay, I finally said. One word, but it cracked something open. We cleared out the sunroom first, pushed the furniture to the sides, rolled up the rugs, taped butcher paper along the floor and windows. Marcus installed a low table he found in the garage, scarred with old paint but still sturdy. Tyler helped tape markers to the walls. He didn't say anything, but I caught him arranging the jars of paint by hue instead of alphabet. It was his way of making it right. By Saturday, we were ready, barely. The first group was small, 4 kids. Their parents hovered at drop-off, uncertain whether they were signing their children up for art class or some strange experiment. "Is there a curriculum?" one mother asked. "Nope," I answered honestly. "Just color, sound, and space to try." She didn't look convinced, but she let go of her son's hand and he shuffled into the room, eyes wide, hands twitching like antennas testing the air. For the first 10 minutes, no one touched anything. One boy stood at the window and hummed. A girl sat in the corner, staring at her shoes. The other 2 just paced, circling the room like uncertain satellites. I knelt beside a jar of blue paint, dipped a sponge in, and pressed it gently to the butcher paper. No words, no invitation. Just the sound of wet fabric on paper and a splash of color. I did it again. Then again. The pattern grew. So did the silence. And then I heard it. A small giggle. The pacing stopped. A tiny hand reached out. Another sponge. Another splash. Blue. Then red. Then a streak of yellow across the floor like someone had thrown sunshine. The boy at the window started to hum louder, then began tapping the glass in time with his breath. I gave him a drumstick and let him test the floor. He didn't need instructions. He needed permission. The girl in the corner never spoke, but she picked up a marker and drew a perfect spiral that grew and grew until it reached the edge of the paper wall. At one point, paint dripped down the side of a cabinet. Marcus looked at it, raised an eyebrow, and said, "We'll call that texture." I laughed. It was messy, unstructured, awkward, but it was alive. After the session, the same mother approached me. "He didn't scream," she said quietly, like she couldn't believe her own voice. "Usually in new spaces, he screams." I nodded, wiping blue from my wrist. "We don't need them to be quiet here," I said. "Just honest." She looked at me for a long time, then nodded once, like someone who'd been holding her breath for years and finally let a little air in. That night, after everyone had gone, I sat alone in the room. The floor was chaos, but the good kind. And on the wall, written in crayon by a hand I didn't see during class, were 4 words. "This place feels soft." By the 3rd Saturday, the paint stains on the floor had started to feel permanent, like the house had stopped trying to be pristine and started becoming something else entirely. The kids came back. That surprised me more than anything. They remembered the space, the rhythms, even the order of snacks. One boy, Ethan, brought a folded sheet of paper with him. He didn't say hello, didn't make eye contact, just walked past me, straight to the far wall, and pinned it up with a magnet he must have taken from home. I didn't look right away. He didn't want me to. Instead, I helped his mother settle in the side room we'd turned into a quiet corner for waiting parents. She looked exhausted but hopeful. A familiar combination. Later, when the room was full of finger drumming and sponge prints and off-key humming, I finally walked over to Ethan's paper. It was a drawing I recognized. Not because he had copied it exactly, but because I'd seen the original. Hanging on Marcus's wall. Weight of waiting. But Ethan had changed it. The swirling lines that had once tangled in frustration now stretched outward like wings. The center, once red and tight, was now softer orange, like warmth, and in the corner, in blocky pencil. Not stuck, just waiting different. I felt the breath leave my chest, slowly. Later, I showed it to Marcus. He didn't say anything for a long time. Just ran his thumb along the edge of the paper like it might dissolve if handled too harshly. He's never drawn anything from memory before, I said. At least not like this. Marcus nodded. He didn't copy it. He answered it. We stood in the middle of the now dried mess of the day. Tyler had drawn chalk roads across the tile again. Someone had added googly eyes to a mop bucket. It didn't matter. What mattered was that something had shifted. This doesn't feel like a program anymore, I murmured. What does it feel like? I paused. A place to land. Marcus looked out toward the kids, now packing up, laughing, tugging their parents toward the wall to show them their spots. He said, half under his breath. Elise used to say healing wasn't linear. It just moved forward in spirals. I looked again at Ethan's drawing. Not a perfect circle, not a straight line, just motion. Forward. Still messy. Still real. And in that moment, with the air thick with crayon and purpose, I understood. We weren't fixing these kids. We were giving them the space to name their own survival. And sometimes that began with a picture no one expected and a title you had to earn. Nowhere to go but forward. It was Marcus's idea, but he pretended it wasn't. You know, he said one afternoon, stirring honey into his tea, if these walls are going to be covered in paint anyway, might as well hang them on purpose. I raised an eyebrow. He didn't meet my eyes. Just saying, the lighting's best right before sunset. And so, 3 Saturdays later, we hosted our first exhibit. No invitations, no RSVPs, just parents, siblings, a couple of curious neighbors, and a few folding chairs pulled from the garage. We dimmed the overhead lights, opened the windows, and let the late afternoon sun pour into the room like warm water. We didn't frame the pieces, didn't label them. Each child picked one drawing or painting to hang. Some were full of color, bursting off the paper. Others were soft, barely there pencil ghosts that you had to lean in close to understand. Tyler chose a piece he'd worked on quietly over 3 weeks. A swirl of black, blue, and copper that looked chaotic from a distance, but when you stepped closer, the lines formed a bird mid-flight. He called it Noise with Wings. One little girl, Maya, had painted a field of stick figures lying flat, their faces turned upward toward the sky. At the bottom corner, she'd written, "Just because they're still doesn't mean they're broken." Parents wandered the room slowly, unsure if they were supposed to clap or whisper. Some cried. No one took photos. It didn't feel right. This was for seeing, not saving. As the sun dipped lower, the light stretched across the floor and hit the wall just so, illuminating a single corner where Ethan's reimagined version of Weight of Waiting now hung. In this light, the orange center glowed. It looked like it was breathing. I found Marcus watching quietly from the doorway. "You were right," I said. "This house was built for this." He smiled, just a little. "No, it became this." We didn't make a speech. There was no ending moment, just people noticing, just children watching their parents see them, maybe truly for the first time. The last of the guests left at dusk. Tyler helped me collect stray markers. One had rolled under the table and left a streak across the tile. I left it there. Marcus turned off the lights one by one, leaving only the hallway lamp on, casting that same warm, steady glow I remembered from the first day we arrived. Before going upstairs, he paused beside the wall, ran his hand just under one of the drawings, not touching it, just knowing it was there. I stood alone in the room a few minutes longer. There was a stillness, not the lonely kind, the kind that follows meaning. And in that golden hush of a house that once grieved in silence, the light became a language we all understood. The last piece wasn't planned. We'd finished hanging all the children's work. The sun was already dipping, golden fingers brushing the top of every canvas and paper scrap. Parents had started arriving again, their voices hushed in a way that told me they understood this wasn't just an art show, it was memory, mid-formation. That's when Tyler tugged my sleeve. He didn't speak. He just pointed toward the corner wall, the only one left blank. In his hands, he held a half-finished canvas. One we'd started together weeks ago, but never completed. A messy swirl of our mornings, our silences, our shared survival. At first it was just color, layers of blue, then yellow, then a rough circle in the middle that never quite made sense. But Tyler had added something. A bridge. A simple brown arc across the center. On one side, a smaller figure in chalk gray tones. On the other, a larger shape, outlined in warm copper. Between them, thin lines stretched like threads pulled from one hand to another. He'd called it passed along. When I looked down, he'd already picked up a brush and dipped it into gold. He looked up at me, waiting. Not for permission, for participation. I knelt beside him. Together we filled in the space around the bridge. Not to make it prettier, just fuller, more whole. No one told us what it meant. We didn't need to. Marcus approached as we hung it in the final space. He didn't ask questions, just stood there, eyes locked on the canvas, his hand resting on the wall beside it like he was grounding himself. Elise used to say the most important pieces are the ones made between people, he said, voice soft. Even if they don't speak the same language. I nodded. It's not perfect, I said. The edges are rough, some of the paint's still wet. That's why it's real, he replied. That night, just before the last guest left, a small boy, maybe 6, stopped in front of the painting and pointed. Who made this one? He asked. Tyler stood quietly beside me, fingers tucked in the sleeve of his hoodie. I said, We both did. The boy stared for a long time, then said, It looks like it's helping. Helping what? I didn't ask. He already knew. After they left, I stood before the painting again. I saw my mother in the quiet gray. I saw Elise in the copper light. I saw Tyler finally in motion, not stuck in the shadows of my worry. I saw us, and I saw something else I never expected. I wasn't alone anymore. We'd passed it along, and someone would carry it further. The gallery room was quiet again. The children's artwork had been taken down carefully, wrapped, and returned to proud hands. The folding chairs stacked in the hallway. The sunlight now came later, softer, brushing across the walls like it knew this house had earned its peace. Marcus found me in the kitchen, drying out jars of paintbrushes, fingers stained pink and green. I want to show you something, he said. He didn't wait for an answer, just turned, expecting me to follow. We walked upstairs, past the room that had once been locked, past the quiet corner where Elise's sketchbook still sat like unopened letters. Into his study one I rarely entered. He handed me a frame, simple wood, worn around the edges. Inside, a photograph. Elise. Her hair was pulled back, wild curls escaping around her temples. No makeup, smudged charcoal on her cheek. She was laughing mid-laugh, really the kind of unfiltered joy you don't pose for. She held a paintbrush in one hand, the other stretched out of frame, probably gesturing to something she was explaining too fast to wait for. In the bottom corner, scribbled in her handwriting, faint but still legible, "We don't have to change the world, just make it warmer." I stared at that sentence for a long time. Then Marcus said, almost too quietly, "She wrote that the day before her last treatment." I looked up at him. He wasn't crying, but there was something in his posture, shoulders not as straight, hands clasped a little too tightly, that told me this moment mattered. "She never wanted a plaque," he continued. "Never cared about having her name on a building or a bench, but she would have liked this, what you're doing, what you made of what she left behind." I looked down at the photo again. I hadn't known Elise. Not really. But in a way, I did. I knew her through the room she painted with silence, through the sketches half-finished but fully felt, through Marcus, who still played her music behind doors he used to keep shut, through the kids, who didn't know her name but walked barefoot through the house she built with intention. I held the frame to my chest. "May I keep this?" I asked. Marcus nodded. "I think she'd want that." That night, after Tyler fell asleep, I placed the photo on the small shelf above my desk. Beside it, our painting passed along. And in that quiet space, I wrote Elise a letter. Not because I owed her something, but because some people leave behind more than memory. They leave you more yourself than you were before they touched your life, even if they never meant to, even if you never met. At the end of the letter, I added one line, barely visible beneath my signature. We didn't pass each other meaninglessly, because we hadn't, because we won't. And that, I finally understood, was the kind of legacy no one can erase. People still ask how it all started. They expect something dramatic. A grant, a partnership, a generous check. But it started with a question, one I barely had the voice to ask. Back then, I didn't see dignity in it. I thought I was scraping the bottom. I thought I was lowering myself, begging for scraps of someone else's comfort. "You're not going to eat that, are you?" That was how I began. Not with a mission, not with a plan, just with hunger, and not just the kind you feel in your stomach. I didn't know what I was really asking for, but now I do. I wasn't asking for leftovers. I was asking for a chance to matter again, a chance to pick up what life had scattered, a chance to take the thread someone else left behind and try to weave something whole from it. That sandwich? It wasn't charity. It was a doorway. That chair across from Marcus? It wasn't pity. It was space. And now, every time a new child walks through the front porch with stained sleeves and bright questions, every time a parent sits quietly by the wall, eyes scanning for signs of hope, I remember that first day like it just happened. The hunger, the risk, the quiet miracle of being met with stillness, not judgment. And I think, this is what we pass along. Not perfect answers, not finished legacies, just warmth, just permission. Just one steady place where someone says, "You're not too late. Come in anyway." Tyler once asked me why the kids keep coming back. I told him the truth. Because this place doesn't treat them like they're broken. He nodded like he understood. But later that night, he added something to the bottom of one of our signs. In his careful handwriting, "Here, you don't have to earn your welcome." That's when I knew. We weren't just continuing Elise's dream. We were giving it roots. So no, I wasn't asking for someone's leftovers. I was asking if there was still a seat at the table. And now? Now we've built a bigger one.